Welcome to the Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. My name is Dr. Adriana Popescu. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and leader in the field of mental health, energy psychology, addiction, trauma, and empowerment. In this podcast, we will be exploring mental health from a variety of perspectives, from the spiritual to the shamanic and beyond. What if mental illness isn't everything we think it is? What if everything we see as a pathology is actually a possibility? What else is possible with mental health? Hi everyone, Dr. Adriana Popescu here with you today with another episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. I have with me today Justen Martin. He is a pioneering luminary in holistic transformation who stands as the beating heart behind the My Mind project. With an open-minded approach and core values deeply rooted in trust, expansion, fun, and courage, Justen's endeavors are more than just a mission, they're a resonant calling. He is deeply committed to making a significant impact on the world's number one disability, depression. Justen seamlessly intertwines health, wealth, and relationships with the potent trinity of mindset, meditation, and microdosing to redefine, elevate, and expand human potential. Even with my glasses, I'm challenged sometimes. Welcome, Justen.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thanks so much for being here. I'm very interested in our conversation we're going to be having today. But of course, as always, I always like to start with hearing a little bit about our guest. Tell us a bit about yourself, your experiences, and what led you to be doing this work you're doing today.
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm reminded of when we first met, the conversations we had of, the different forms of how we can go about helping people, the tech, the tools, and the therapies. And that's really what led me to where I am today. There's a lot of random moments with amazing people who help you along the way through what I think all of us have to endure in the lived reality of the world and the settings that we live in, which is just that suffering exists, challenges exist, and how do we go about making sure our existence is meaningful, purposeful? And for many people, we're really figuring out, what does that mean? And, how does that look in the day to day? And so over the last 20 years, I've been very privileged to be in leadership management and the form of, in some way, accountability or helping people achieve, whether that be goals or needs or support and help in the health and fitness industry, and then the entrepreneurial fields of business, specifically real estate, mortgage, and then entrepreneurship. And so working with so many leaders in both the corporate setting, but also the entrepreneurial field, is that it is a very intimate realm when you leave behind what we do. It's the who does it. And so many relationships formed. And in a leadership position, you tend to be involved in really the problems, issues, or challenges that people face. And over that 20 plus years, started in health and fitness, this desire for what many people are looking to do, which is live a healthy life, not a perfect life, not one that is removed from reality and just the challenges that, present themselves to us on the day to day, but really, how can I be somewhat happy? How can I be somewhat healthier? And overall, there are so many remedies. And the challenge is, what should I listen to? What should I do, doctor? And that of who prescribes, that of who recommends is such a tremendous responsibility to guide people into hopefully helping empower them to make the right decisions, because ultimately that's what will lead them to keep making them, is when they can trust themselves, they feel comfortable about the things that they're doing. And so unfortunately on that path, our family endeared what many people have, which is a certain sickness or suffering, which was my wife's cancer. And as we went through battling cancer, we were introduced to a process, a protocol, many prescriptions, and just this unfortunate event that leads to many life decisions, many day-to-day decisions. And it exposed her and I to the absence of alternative treatment in one of the four leading causes of death in America. And that was very hard for two people like her and I, who have been in the positions we've been in, to make the decisions and guide people along with their lives and partner with so many people of, like you, different levels of education and responsibility, that we were aware. We're aware that these things exist in the world, specifically the one we're talking about today, the microdosing of psilocybin and alternative plant-based therapies. Is being aware is one thing, but then considering what role does that play in your life, for back to what we were talking about, healthier or happier, knowing that many of us are dealing with certain levels of suffering, past, present, and inevitably future. Is that when we went through that process of battling our cancer, it opened our eyes to not just what we were experiencing, but what so many people experience, which is the absence of awareness, consideration, ultimately, though, the options to maybe choose other alternatives to, again, endure the suffering or work through the healthier, happier components of life and the sickness that most likely we will have to get through and the suffering we'll have to get through. And that led us down the research almost a decade ago in plant-based therapies. And ultimately, as over the last couple of years, we've seen this crisis of mental health, in America and now the world, is that it led us to what for the last 20 years we've always wanted to do, which was not just do a job, but somewhat be in a job, meaning that the job you do is something you're a little passionate about. It's something that you feel like you have a level of education or some level of achievement or greatness. And then who needs it? So then that way, right, you could call it a profession. And that ultimately led us down to the last decade, really exploring plant-based therapies. And then over the last several years, the changes in regulations all across America, and specifically for us here locally in Colorado, with that of psychedelic use, specifically psilocybin mushrooms, and the forming of My Mind Project, which, like you said, truly exists to help people improve, expand, and heal their minds, knowing that the world's number one disability is depression. And we need to figure out how we can empower more people through these different states of consciousness and figure out, ultimately, like we said, how to be a little bit happier, how to be a little bit healthier mentally, physically, psychologically. And that is exactly why I'm here today, and just very excited from our original call on knowing that it relates to a lot of the people that we connect with, the therapists, the doctors, the physicians, the coaches, the guides, as there are many people out there with what we talked about. The responsibility is the person that people trust, meaning they place trust in you to hopefully help them. But ultimately, as a reminder, I think for all of us, is in many ways what we want to do is do that with the least amount of harm. We want to do that with the understanding that for most people, that is not what we can do for them, but so much how we can help them do a lot for themselves. And that's what we really like about the microdosing aspect of subperceptual or small amounts, right, of psychedelic medicine to help people see noticeable change. And yeah, I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Yeah, me too. There's a lot of areas I actually want to cover with you. But one thing that just kind of pops just from what you were saying just now, to me, so many of us end up on this path, toward wellness, toward expanding ourselves, healing ourselves through a crisis. And it
Right.
sounds like you had and I did as well. I had a healing crisis of my own. I ended up having a very long battle with Lyme disease and chronic fatigue syndrome. That's how I got into holistic, what at the time were called alternative therapies, because Western medicine didn't have much for me at that time. It still really doesn't in this particular area. So, the idea that you now have created a business to support people in pursuing wellness as just part of their natural growth process rather than waiting until a massive life crisis occurs for people to sort of get the message, like if the universe is knocking, you're kind of ignoring it until you get the 2x4 to the head.
Right.
um, yeah, can you just say a little bit more about that? People like being more proactive with their health across the board, and I want to talk about the holistic piece in a minute too, but physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
Right.
which is a big piece of what, going through a crisis like that often opens up for folks. Just
Yes.
can you say something about that?
Yeah. I had a mentor the other day used the definition for crisis as a turning point of dis-ease, right? So the mental health crisis, we are at a turning point, which is why I believe a lot of this regulation, going back to studies, is not about so much right or wrong. It's really what gets us the safest, best result to help a turning point or that crisis. And for many people, it is like you said, it's this cognitive or emotional side. And we really look at part of the My Mind project, it's 4 dimensions. And for a lot of people, psychedelics, which you could look at that as mind manifestation, has been on the spiritual realm, just this very spiritual bypass, the spiritual desired. Whereas we spend more time in the lived reality of the day to day, or what you would consider the setting aspect of, psychedelic use. And we really look at the emotional, physical, and cognitive aspect of what people can do every single day. So then that way it's not at a turning point, it's at a point where they can turn in the right direction. And not everybody's the same, right? But we all know, and this is what is very, it's what keeps me enthused every day, is at the root for most people, isn't that what everybody's looking for? A little bit healthier, a little bit happier. And we package that in this term called wellness, which is very important, but people forget wellness has many aspects to it, from neurological to psychological to physiological to biological. So, like you were saying, there's no one size fits all. It's really, instead of at a turning point, how can we incorporate wellness into a turn for people in the right direction? And for us, Adriana, what we use is the turning points of consciousness, meaning, Dr. Hawkins back many, many years ago wrote something called the map of consciousness. And it was just a very good intellectual way to break down this spiritual paradigm that many people talk about to really simplified paradigms, survival paradigms, and stages of consciousness like fear or anger, which I think many people can understand that, right? Hatred. Then into more reason integrity paradigms, which is where most people are trying to turn into, is just, could I have more courage? Could I be more understanding? Could I have more acceptance of my lived reality? Because what we never want to do is dismiss that a lot of people's lived reality is challenging. They're enduring a lot of suffering, and some of us will never even be able to sympathize. So, what can we do is offer empathy in a way to help them through these stages. And for us, we kind of look at them more as consciousness stages that people can elevate to in a more ordinary state. What they actually called is non-ordinary states of consciousness. Most of us tend to have an ordinary state that we would like to see turn upward, per se, to where, gosh, I sure wish my day to day just felt a little bit more this way, instead of, I find myself, doctor, in this situation. Or for me, it's not a doctor. And I think it's important for us to share today, right? That everything, especially with the sensitivity of speaking to psychedelics, is, this is not doctor's recommendation. This is not what people should do. This is empowering them through the difference between, per se, a therapist to a coach to a guide, and helping people in a non-regulated space. Because with psychedelics, it's more state or federal regulation to then actual, not prescription, but protocols, guidelines. And so what we try to do is help a lot of people who have this desire to achieve a non-ordinary state of consciousness, which you've seen with, competitive athletes, people that just want to get to that flow state or that bliss state. And what we really want to do is make sure that we help people prevent that from being too much of a desire to escape their lived reality, compared to helping them each day turn in the right directions to seeing an improvement, right, to what their ordinary state is.
So lots to pull apart there. I definitely, the whole field of psychedelic assisted therapy, this whole resurgence of the use of psychedelics for consciousness raising, for healing from various mental health diagnoses and conditions. All of this is huge right now, all over the
Right.
world, not just the
Right.
United States, right?
Right.
And I you know, I've used the term before. I think we're a bit in the Wild West, if you will, around
Yeah.
that because you know, for a long time, the feds put the kibosh on this research. This research started back, you know, for those that don't know, started back in the 19 even 50s and 60s. And, you know, here in Northern California, we have one of the luminaries of the psychedelic assisted world. Lots of the luminaries, actually, some of them were my professors in grad school. I was very fortunate to have, but you know, Dr. Stanislav Grof, you know, he was doing research. I wrote a paper on him in college. He was looking at LSD and how LSD might assist people, particularly alcoholics,
Yes.
with their addiction and depression. And so there was research happening at large scale university. It was at Johns Hopkins. And then, you know, the late 60s happened, and the federal government under Nixon decided that, you know, all these drugs have no benefit whatsoever. They're dangerous to humanity because they're raising consciousness, which is a whole nother conversation, but they're dangerous to the young folks, and therefore we're going to make everything Schedule 1 and outlaw it. And so it was for many, many years until more recently, when there's been this incredible resurgence, and there are tons of studies. There's a huge amount of research happening with multiple different substances. Psilocybin, ibogaine is another psychedelic that they're using for addiction treatment. Certainly looking at ketamine and, you know, LSD and ayahuasca and all the different things, but psilocybin is a big one, and that's, you know, been the focus with your work. So I kind of want to just, you know, name that, give a little bit of that history for folks who don't know. And we are truly in a renaissance time, and protocols, procedures,
Right.
policies, all of that is still evolving. And
Yeah.
one of the caveats that, you know, I know you and I talked about before that I'd love to hear your thoughts on is, you know, there's a lot of people out there claiming to be a shaman, claiming to be an expert on this or that, you know, psychedelic kind of work. How do you suggest, like, people who are brand new to this, who really don't maybe have experience in this world, like, how do they figure out who to work with or who to trust or how to get started?
Right.
And then there's this whole idea of macro dosing versus microdosing, which we'll get into. But like, where do people even start in this Wild West world we're living in?
Yeah. It's a great question. I took some notes to simplify it, hopefully, because the most important thing, Adriana, that I would share with people after this is to go do more research. Don't listen to what I say, don't listen to what you say, but hopefully we peaked awareness. That's really what is critical for us. And again, our sole goal at My Mind Project is to provide affordable but the highest quality natural ingredients and education. Like, it really is. And it stems from, you have Oregon that passed some regulations that made it more of a clinical approach. The only challenge with the clinical approach is with more regulation, with more situations that cost certain levels of expense management and or regulatory agencies, is that that gets passed down to some people. So it didn't make it very accessible to what I would call the general public that really needs this. Now, what separates us from some other places is like the work you do as what I would consider an educator, a professor, a doctor, you know, these certificates, these guides, this education that allows you to work within a specific realm. So we tend to refer out anybody that is looking too much for the spiritual realm, that macrodosing, heroic spiritual bypass of the day to day, and those in the what I would consider like trauma and healing, meaning really deep down, you know, there are some thoughts around withdrawal, around suicidal ideation, around things that just you need somebody who has decades and certain levels of regulation requirements compared to, like you said, right now, across the nation, it's wild, wild west, which is a great fear. And the reason being is that we're really entering the third wave. So when you ask, like, who do you find? Well, one, you should ask about their education. You should ask about their affiliates, they're partners. So, we've partnered with Third Wave in our education, the Microdosing Institute out of the Netherlands. So it's not just a Western aspect. It's a, hey, hundreds of thousands of dollars of education poured in our organization to guide people through this. And then years of really listening to experts, practitioners. So then that way, the challenge is that sometimes, and you could probably imagine, and I think the listeners is, but in fields like this, sometimes we're just going to go where we can get it, right? Meaning it's not regulated. I'm being exposed to it. I would really like to try it. So honestly, whoever's willing to risk the most, I guess that's where I end up. But the problem with that is back again to, so I'll share a couple things you asked. How do you start, right? So first, you need to have an intention for any psychedelic use. We're going to speak specifically to microdosing psilocybin mushrooms only, though, because that's our field, is the most important component of psilocybin mushrooms on a microdosing perspective for improving, expanding, or healing, is it's a non-specific amplifier. It's a natural plant. And the way that it somehow, right, from just the release into every single person's systems, because like we said, there's a lot of them, right? Biological, physical, psychological, you know what I mean? All these systems that are supposed to auto-regulate and work together, that right now we understand some of our systems aren't working so well together, that so many people are going to have a different experience. So first you need an intention. So then that way, this idea of non-specific amplification and the definition of psychedelics, mind manifestation, is part of this, goes to all the systems of cognitive and psychological work and why you're even doing it in the first place. After intention, what you have is a calibration. Every single person needs to start somewhere that has a proven calibration model with however they're providing you the psilocybin mushrooms. Some people have truffles. Some people, you know what I mean, have capsules. Companies have chocolate bars, gummies to make it feel a little different, right? You know what I mean? But again, are they using synthetic ingredients or this all natural ingredients? So then that way, again, the way that you're processing all of this hopefully is the most natural way for all of this to start auto regulating. So you have the next part is a calibration week or two. And you need to make sure you have a guide or a self guide that is very, very emphasized on providing you feedback. So then that way you understand the experience that you're going through, because just because you had it one day doesn't mean you're going to have it the next. And remember, this isn't like the flowers are talking to you. That's not microdosing, right? But what it is the idea of, and for some people who don't know how psilocybin mushrooms work, is the easiest way to look at it is two systems. For a lot of people, we have all these cells in our body. We have these certain things that make up certain areas of our brain. One of them is your amygdala. And the nervous system that communicates with that, for most people, it's overactive right now. We have a lot of judgment. We have a lot of fear. We have a lot of anxiety. And so that part of our system is constantly working, that has taken over another part of our system, which is our prefrontal cortex or our frontal lobes. And that is really where emotional and mood regulation or cognition is, meaning understanding these things we're going through, but also being able to not identify yourself to the emotion in a way, right? Meaning I can start really working through regulating my mood. So the overall goal when people consume a small amount of psilocybin is to reduce some of these areas to allow yourself to now, when you do the work, which is why it works with therapy, it works in other mindful practices, is that sometimes, and I think most people know this from meditation, is some people tried to meditate and they were like, it was the most miserable experience of my life because the first 3 minutes was torture. So it allows some people to actually go do some of these self-regulated work and experience a positive reward. What happens is then you get natural dopamine, not from substances, but actually like these unexpected things of working on healing led to a positive emotion that now your dopamine systems are working the right way compared to feeding them through other forms of self-regulation. So after calibration, you have protocol. So once you know the right amount that you should take, and just a rule of thumb that, James Fadiman and pioneers and researchers have shared, is you take the least amount to get the effects that you're looking for, which is why it takes a certain amount. And this is the fear of the wild, wild west, right? Is We have to have the right control systems within how we respond to these sensations of love, belonging, bliss, or maybe a more positive mood. And remember that this is a lived reality that you're not trying to escape. You're just trying to work day by day, getting into a better direction, heading towards happier, healthier, right? Or higher levels of consciousness. So after protocol, you have integration. This is where the real work happens, right? 2 weeks into it, you should then now be integrating, most likely anywhere between about 4, 8, 10 weeks of mindful practices, therapy, answering questions, journaling, and really training these systems that are now most likely creating awareness to things, which is why, again, non-specific amplification could amplify, though, a worse mood, right? Because it's bringing out something. You could find yourself yawning a lot or being more tired on it, going, I thought they said this gives me more energy, physical. And it goes, well, no, it's actually reminding you for the first time that you've been drinking 6 cups of coffee a day and working 14 hours. And you thought that meant you had energy. And all this is getting back to auto regulating our systems through this integration process. And so you need to make sure you have a lot of mindful consumption exercises through that integration so you can speed up your own understanding of this, which eventually leads people to more empowerment because they've made sense of something. I don't necessarily know if you'll ever understand because that means nothing's ever changing. And we all know, I think in the world, change is the inevitable, right? So it's more like how you actually start making sense of past traumas, letting go of future thoughts to really now what we would say after integration is this period of insight, realization, and understanding. You start now being able to actually really do the work on your original intention, seeing this positive reward or change in direction, but it's not this complete spiritual bypass that happened overnight through some of these clinics and some of these other things that definitely have an immense amount of studies and work. It's just not our field. We guide people through these protocols, and then people take periods off, usually about 2 to 4 weeks. And then many people can start a new protocol with a new intention or understanding that, hey, I let go of my anger, but I still have a lot of fear. And I would like to get to a little more courage. So, same intention. It's just I'm understanding I'm working my way up these predominant emotions and or states of consciousness. So to me, those would be the kind of 5 components of how you start. The other part, though, and we can send to any listeners, the most important part, though, is sourcing. From just making sure, like we said, I don't have that in there, but that's the challenge, is making sure you're sourcing the medicine from the right place, you know what I mean, or people, not just because they're trying to make some money, even though most businesses, right? If you solve major problems, there's money to be made. So it's doing it the right way, not the wrong way.
Right. And I really appreciate that you outlined the protocol in that kind of way. I think that's like so important because what I'm kind of seeing, with even just people I know and friends of friends is like there's a bit of this sort of willy-nilly like, well, here you go, take this every day or in some sort of 3 days on, 4 days on, 3 days off, da, da, da. But I'm not always seeing that people are going in there intentionally. I don't think that a lot of people know what exactly to expect or what they're doing. I've heard some funny stories from folks about surprising things that happened along the way. And I really want to stress one thing you said as a caveat because people think, people are always looking for the quick fix and they're looking for the magic pill or substance or thing to make them feel better. And yes, I think psychedelics hold that promise, but it isn't always a straight line from feeling bad to feeling good. You actually might start to feel worse before you feel better. And can you just say even a little bit more about that? Because I think so many people are not prepared for this element of it that you might actually need to work through some things to get to feel better.
Yeah. There was a funny video that somebody said, like, this whole microdosing phase, who would have thought just taking a small amount of drugs could be a benefit, and it goes back to this whole idea of start low, go slow. Your mindset, set and setting are really the 2 aspects they talk about with psychedelic use. But to achieve these non-ordinary states, meaning these higher states that you want to be in. They don't even have to be with psychedelics. What it is the mushrooms, the use of psilocybin mushrooms help with the amplification of some of this to allow you to actually start getting through some of the roadblocks. And the way I always explain it is, instead of going at the wall and running your head against it, thinking you're going to break through, there's a lot of people who also like bounce off it and never do it again. This is kind of like, and then there's also those that like go backwards, meaning just, well, good, I won't deal with that then. I'll go this way, compared to just taking a different route. Your systems, the way you think, the way you feel, this is more like going around it like a detour that gets you the right destination, but you still see what you're trying to address. And so the idea of like, could it be negative, is back to, again, your intention. And if your intention is most likely not rooted in this understanding, like you said, Adriana, this is not going to be a cure all. Should everybody do psychedelics? I don't think so at all. There are many aspects, though, around the best use for an individual around what we predominantly help with, which is like anxiety, depression, not traumatic depression, but like I am constantly no longer feeling reward or motivation. And these things I used to feel a certain way, which is more reconnecting systems back to these stages that most of us understand or know. Those that are completely lost, right, need more of the day to day clinical setting to help them first find themselves. Now, for most people, if they know these things, which is what in business I've worked with so many people, and or just life with individuals and corporations, they know what to do, they're just choosing not to do it. That's the best example of this. Is the longer that you know you shouldn't do something but you're doing it, that's where the negative results usually find themselves in this instance. But it's probably one of the safest, easiest, and most convenient ways for people to improve, expand, or heal certain areas of their minds, utilizing the very small yet noticeable effects of microdosing mushrooms. There's other ones, and the example people ask all the time is like, well, what if I'm on antidepressants? Well, if you're on more than 3, there's certain guidelines. If you're on more than 2, there's certain guidelines. But for most people, if you're just on one antidepressant, there's countless stories of how you can go about, you know what I mean, transitioning from something that is more of a protocol compared to a prescription, to eventually, right, getting all these systems, right, the nervous system, then to the neurochemicals, to the neurotransmitters, to the hormonal responses, right? All these things that happen that unfortunately we tend to lose control of sometimes when we're dependent on something compared to an actual way to use for a specific intention, which, for a lot of people in the world, they didn't know that, SSRIs and antidepressants in the 80s, they were really, the original prescription was only 90 days, right? Like people were supposed to use it for a short period of time, predominantly to save lives. And I still think they do. The challenge is, again, like you said, well, where do I start? And then where do I continue? Because if you just go get access to these, you may continue the wrong way. We're very grateful because in the state of Colorado, we're able to share them, part of our healing service, and people have access to them, unfortunately, only locally in the state of Colorado. And they can go through this process of being guided and understand it in a very safe, affordable way. We help people with trusted resources out of state. But then the thing I would recommend for people is, once you found your trusted source on how to like actually source this, you need to make sure you're going through a protocol. And again, those stages I talked about, really intention setting, calibration, and you need to do calibration every time. Back to that goal of what's the lowest amount I can take to get the effects that I'm looking for. Then after that, choosing a protocol. Some people do every other day. Some people do 1 day on, 2 days off. Some people stack it 4 days on, 3 days off. Again, you probably want to know, why should you do that? And there's different reasons. There's neurogenesis, there's therapeutic, you know what I mean? There's cognitive, and some of them help in other ways. So again, those are the resources. On our website, we have a resource page where we give away probably more free information than anywhere else, just so then that way people can better understand this. But great question, just, around that piece. And my fear and concern is just that we don't treat it with this respect level. But I also understand the frustration of many people across the nation. I have family all on the East Coast, and they're like, and I can't get it from you. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, no, you can't, So it's just, hopefully we continue to see. And the other part, though, too, Adriana, is if people don't treat it with a certain level of respect, we can go real fast back to the 80s to where, you know what I mean, we're not even looking at this anymore as proven alternative, safe, opportunities for, like I said, for us, it's more anxiety, depression, and helping people with forms of addiction. That could be addiction to many aspects, right? Business, porn, alcohol, drugs. I mean, there's addiction comes in many ways. So just, and they're all very serious to people and what we talk about, happier and healthier lives.
Yeah. And again, I want to really highlight, I think it's so important for us to speak responsibly about these things because there's a lot of people out there that are just focused on the positives and all the wonderful things that can come from this type of work. And I agree that that's possible, but they're not talking about the potential pitfalls and dangers and the contraindications. And, you don't want to just go into this willy nilly. If you are somebody who's been diagnosed with a more serious mental health condition, if you have severe trauma or post traumatic stress disorder, this is not something to take just lightly jump into because of the way these drugs can work on particularly trauma. And this is, I'm speaking a little bit more to the macro dosing, which I still want to get to, but what we're finding is these drugs can actually open up trauma capsules, like where trauma material is stored in our bodies and in our brains. And people, I mean, I hear stories over and over again. A lot of times people come to me with the horror stories of what has happened when they have used psychedelics. And setting, of course, makes a difference. Sometimes I'm hearing stories about I went to Burning Man and I took a big dose of mushrooms and I had this horrible traumatic experience. It brought up all this stuff I had like forgotten about or I'd never wanted to deal with. And so those are potential risks. And, if you are somebody who has that, don't take this lightly. Speak with a trusted, expert or your therapist or your psychiatrist. If you're on heavier duty meds, right? If you're on a mood stabilizer, antipsychotics, or multiple medications, again, this is something to first discuss, with the experts who are prescribing you those things, who know about those things and the interactions so that you don't have an adverse experience. We want, if you're going to do this, you want to have as positive an experience as possible, but also go in there knowing yourself and knowing what the potential risks might be for you.
Yeah. So well said. There's very few people I know in life that can even get through life without a guide. We have mentors, we have family, we have communities, we have tribes. So when you think about something that helps you expand states of consciousness and or bypass, you know what I mean, current conscious to subconscious spiritual aspects or realms of thought, is that could it be possible that it's going to lead you to surfacing some negative thought that you've been holding on to that has been fearful? And just like in life, you need a guide there to guide you through it. I am a practitioner, have been microdosing for a couple years. I actually have not participated in too many macro journeys, but I've gone through, a $20,000 course to be a certified guide to make sure, again, if we're speaking to anything, you're just aware of the other alternatives. And this is where it's going to be beautiful that hopefully as we progress as a nation, as a world, as states, there's going to be a setting for all of these. Some people are going to need a clinical setting. Some people are just going to need a guide. Some people are just going to need the access to the most information, just like many people with the internet can figure out how to go get somewhere now without having to stop and ask for directions. Like, we can empower people as long as people are responsible. And that's really why it's very important, like you said, for make sure that just you're going about this responsibly, knowing a little bit of your current state. We have a pretty cool consciousness quiz that a lot of people take. So for the listeners, if they even just want to have fun and just kind of look at, this overall consciousness score on the paradigms. Dr. Hawkins said that, 85% of the world, and this was, decades ago, so you can imagine it's probably higher now. He just said, live in a survivable state of consciousness. And it's remarkable, Adriana, to see that as people score, probably about 95% of people, that is where they're starting. That's kind of where we know if they're scoring, 50 to 100, it probably makes sense to refer them to people like you and other doctors. When we help people wean off of, antidepressants, it's always start with your primary care, and you'd be amazed though at how many more people now, like I said, the interesting part is though, like there's a lot of guides out there to talk about certain antidepressants, certain drugs, what would be the right protocol if you want to use psychedelics? Psilocybin is the one that tends to usually have the safest or lowest effect, you know what I mean, for people to try. And that's just due to the fact that it is just a natural plant. You know what I mean? It's something that's been around for tens of thousands of years. And that third wave component is like you talked about is you actually get in the study of many religions, you get in the study of many great civilizations. Many of their stories are of that of ecstasy or higher levels, you know what I mean, of consciousness that many people root in some form of psychedelic use, right? I don't think the wine 10,000 years ago was the same wine we're drinking today, right? And so, those are just, again, back to this holistic, natural. Are you really getting good source, good information, and are you in a good place based on how you're using it? So if you're using a macro dose, every single person needs a guide. That's just something that you should be guided through to make sure that, again, you also aren't just doing it, like we said, to bypass your current reality, because that can lead to forms of addiction, even though mushrooms aren't addictive, right? The desire to leave a state of consciousness is the real addiction. And your memory circuits remember the dopamine, you know what I mean, that you felt. And that's why a lot of people don't understand how easy it is to do things the wrong way. So for the microdosing aspect, if you're really hurting, you're going through massive trauma, you probably need to find a more clinical setting or a singular coach that's individualized to guide you through it. And then for, like we said, there's a big chunk of people that this is just going to be a great empowerment for them through guidance, through education, step-by-step process of those 5 that we talked about, that they'll be able to do it in a very community-based form around the people they love, in their homes, at work, you know what I mean, to allow them to function happier and healthier, which is the part where, as you kicked off the bio, we talked about wealth and relationships. I do tie that in there because battling and suffering disease, cancer tends to bankrupt about 98% of the people that go through it. I mean, it wipes out their entire savings. And so that was something that, as we looked at, how can we make this the most affordable way? Because if we don't get access to people to be able to do it, well, then you're never really going to be able to help the people that need it. But at the same time, you have to be very cautious of what need means. And like you said, be mindful of the appropriate people guiding you through that. And as we progress, I'm hoping that the stages will be clinical, community, recreational, guides, coaches. So then that way, again, all the people with the right letters at the end of their names, you know what I mean, are performing what we have all trained for over decades and years to guide people through this process of, again, happier and healthier states.
So, Justin, all that being said, and I'm really glad that, we presented a very balanced view, I think, today of the potentials and the potential pitfalls. Um, what is your sense, if you look at the kind of the state of the world that we're in right now, it's not an easy time here on planet Earth by any means. What would be your vision for the future? And like, what do you see the promise of these plant medicines to be, not just for individuals, but like for the whole of humanity and life on this planet?
Yeah. We use an acronym called STIR, and that is selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness. And that is what we guide people through. So then that way, again, the vision would be that the world lives in the present, knowing that the future is going to change. You can't stop that. And knowing that the past is behind us and it's part of who we are. And so, really, my goal, whether it be through psychedelics, whether it be through therapy, whether it be through somatic breath work or yoga or anything, diet, right, massage, is that every single person works towards neutrality. See, in a state of neutrality, not too high, not too low. So I'm not saying I want the whole world to be happy, right? But just neutral. That every day we have trust. And that's really the predominant emotion of a stage of consciousness of neutrality, is just trust. That you're trusting the people around you. You trust your stages and directions and steps you're taking, knowing, right, that for most of us, the only thing that you can do, since all of us are on different brain functions and, we're in different states of consciousness, that's hard to hear these things, right? Adriana, I mean, you do such amazing work with people, like trying to tell somebody in the immense amount of stage of suffering and grief that it's going to be okay. That's like, it's almost dismissive sometimes, right? Because they're like, you're stupid, or like, that's just, you're crazy. But we know it is going to be okay, but we don't, right? There's so many variables, there's so many timelines. So helping people really get to this level of reason to where, hey, I have neutrality and trust. I have acceptance, which leads to high levels of forgiveness. When we think about these survival paradigms, we can forgive, and most every spiritual teacher, doesn't matter what religion that you look at, it's almost the foundation is that of forgiveness. And in a way, why is that? Is because it leads you closer to a spiritual paradigm, right? A level of more love, joy, and bliss, because it's hard to have love, joy, or bliss in your life when you're holding on to anger, when you have fear. And again, if you're neutral and you trust, it's hard to have fear and anxiety, right? So these are all the stages. I would just say, to answer that question, is more people accept, more people have neutrality, and ultimately could people get to more reason. And what I mean by reason is when you say it's a tough world, it's because it's hard for us to understand one another. And understanding we live in now, not a nation, but a global economy. It's no longer about just what's happening in the state or Colorado. We could have the Supreme Court make decisions, but at the end of the day, when one state has something and another doesn't, like, it's not that nobody else in the other states doesn't know what's going on, right? So it's like, how can we all start operating for more reason to work together? And there are so many great books out there just around universal all the way down to selfishness or self, right? And the overall goal of that kind of acronym is the more that people let go of their selfishness and adopt more selflessness, understanding that we're more connected all together, is maybe that will help us with more reason and understanding, right? The timelessness, as we let go of past and future. Again, back to that amygdala, reduction of the fear center. You know what I mean? We start working with therapists like yourself and centers that can help us finally forgive, or, just not hold on to that past so much, and identify that, guess what? Now that I've done that, I can really do this today work. And that's that kind of timelessness, is you're living in the present. And then when you actually get to start enjoying, again, this lived reality, the day to day, is wouldn't it be great if just things were a little bit more effortless? It didn't take so much, need to deal with this person or that job. And ultimately, that is where I think, for not my vision for the world, but most people's vision, is to experience more love, joy, and growth, right? These like spiritual paradigms. But for me, I think that just knowing the world and kind of where we're at, like, those are the moments that hopefully we remember. We don't get those all the time, how special they are. And so, to answer your question, just leveling up these, states of consciousness to hopefully get away from the survival paradigm, to feel a little bit more neutrality, a little bit more acceptance, and hopefully then making reason of all this. And somebody shared with the other day that instead of trying to understand it, you can just make sense of it. You'll see a lot of great work happen with people once they start making sense of things. Great question. What about you? What do you want to see in the vision? I
I
got turned
mean,
to you.
yeah, I would love to see a world in which there is more neutrality, less polarity, right? Because it's like a lot of the stuff you mentioned, it's people's judgments. I always say judgment is the greatest source of human suffering, both internally and externally, intrapersonally and interpersonally. So I would love to see a world where there wasn't so much of that, and where we weren't functioning from like hundreds and thousands of years of opposition and hate and war and fighting and all the things. And I think all of that has to start, if we do want to change it on a global scale, we have to start within. We have to heal what is at war within us, and what feels fragmented or in conflict, and what is still the pain that's still there. I think we need to heal all of that to be able to move everybody, starts one by one, to move it towards like humanity as a whole. So I'm with you there. Yeah. Um, yeah. So this has really been a wonderful conversation. Justin, for people who are interested in finding out more about your programs and your work, and particularly those in the state of Colorado who could benefit from your services, where do they go?
Yeah. So I'll give it as a whole to start. www.mymindproject.com. We have an amazing resource page. People can take the consciousness quiz and just kind of identify if they want with Dr. David Hawkins and some of just where am I starting? You know what I mean? And in that resource page, we have a 30-day course we give away for free. So we've combined tens of thousands of dollars worth of practitioner, research, education, just to make sure people really understand, like we said, why are you even doing this? And so anybody worldwide can take that course, learn about it. And if they want, we do share just referrals of trusted sources across the nation and the world. Like, so that way, if you want access to this, we can't provide it to you, but we can share some trusted sources that we have. And then other recommendations too, is people just do research. Now, in the state of Colorado, we have a process to which people can define what protocol they want to go through. And then we have the ability to share the mushrooms with them to make sure that they can go through this 5-stage sequence we were talking about and start working through that. And all of that you can find on our products page, our resource page, our trial page. But really, there's a lot of information there. We do have a free 2-week trial for different meditations. So I know we didn't talk about it a ton today, but a lot of it is rooted in different forms of contemplations, visualizations, meditations, because certain brain waves and that prefrontal cortex mood regulation has been found through different states of slowing down, right? And actually looking at, and we could replace the word meditation, because I think some people, that gets to what you're talking about, the gurus and the other things, to really just mindfulness practices that help train these systems that slow down others to help you auto-regulate more of what we're looking for, which is just more days at a knot. Can I get close to that neutrality? Eventually, maybe I'm just walking around with a big smile on my face everywhere, and one day being a spiritual teacher. But, for me, like I said, thank you for asking that. It's to make sure that we can keep providing people affordable access to just the highest quality natural ingredients for those that are looking to do psilocybin mushrooms. And then, for others, just constant education. So then that way, I can't wait. Maybe we'll do like a follow-up interview one day, Adriana, right? Of like what actually happened to these conversations. Cause it's just every day we're going to have to follow the regulations, and the fear and the joy is both that it can lead to major change all across the world if we use it responsibly. I think the science has shown that enough, very safe practice. The downside, right, is if we use it in that kind of spiritual bypass and lack of understanding to what happens when people don't treat things of great power or success with the responsibility that they hold, right? And I think that that's what's amazing about regulatory agencies, for those that get doctorates, certifications, different degrees. And that's where hopefully, right, they'll just continue to make sure that people have the right education in this field to be able to speak to it, even though many people share or talk about it. But I don't know if it's for the right reasons. So as long as we keep doing it for the right reasons, I think most people now are ready for this turning point of this mental health crisis that, lets you and I go with just affirmation and positive that we're going to do it the right way this time because of your show and great people out there. I'm just one of so many amazing individuals in this space that, want to help people, whether that be clinical or community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today, Justen. This has really been a wonderful conversation. Thank you, listeners and watchers, for tuning in. And if you have liked this podcast, please do share, like, comment, follow, review, all the things that you can do. It just takes a couple minutes, but it helps a lot with those algorithms behind the scenes and helps get this information out there in the hands of more people. And please tune in next time for another episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. Dr. Adriana signing off. Thanks again, Justen. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. This has been Dr. Adriana Popescu. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share with others. To find out more about me, my guests, and more, please visit my website at adrianapopescu.org. See you next time.